I wanted to do a little bit of an expansion and more research into this topic, rise of Hindu nationalism, uh, more than what I said in my previous video. So let me see uh, if this will make more sense. Let's give it a try. Rise of Hindu nationalism is very concerning, right? So those are the sort of news pieces and opinion pieces appearing in various left-leaning publications in India and the Western world, mostly US. So I think the argument that um, is getting created is that the rise of Hindu nationalism is very concerning. It's a risk for human values, diversity, secularism, pluralism, liberal values, and yada yada. So let's try to find out with, a very simple high level analysis, right? So once we've sort of set the argument, or this argument, okay, agreed, right? The argument makes sense, right? It has a certain degree of emotional appeal, right? That yeah, something is wrong. We should be concerned. We need to do something about it. So now let's try to break it apart in pieces a little bit, right? So there are many questions we can ask here. First, we can ask is why are we concerned? Second, we can ask who are we? Like who is concerned, right? And third, we can ask is okay, what can we do about it, right? So so before we even get into why are we concerned, I think the moment we're saying that we're concerned about rise of Hindu nationalism and we're worried about you know the risk that it poses to human values, diversity, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, pluralism, liberal values, etc., etc. It's sort of a given that we are in the camp. So whosoever is concerned is already in the camp of, being having endorsed or putting their uh, trust and faith in, human rights, diversity, pluralism, and liberal values. They already uh, are uh, or have those values, right? Right. So that's a fair assumption to make, right? Otherwise, why would you be concerned, right? So with that, right, we want to say why are we concerned? Like, okay, so there's two words there, Hindu nationalism, right? So then we can break it apart into pieces. We can say, okay, nationalism. We can ask, are we concerned about nationalism, right? Is nationalism bad? And that argument kind of falls apart. Because if we were really worried about nationalism, so effectively, what's the worry with the nationalism? Worry with the nationalism is that, um, the nationalism will cause some sort of oppression, uh, either to the rest of the world or internally within that nation, right? So, at least we're not worried in the sense of nationalism at a very high level, right? For example, there are, the entire world is currently divided into nations and have, borders and boundaries, and we sort of are in a world where we accept nationalism, right? We all accept it, right? And if we're worried about, like, for example, a repeat of something like a Germany kind um, uh, incident from the last century where one nation would want to dominate other nations, then that concern, if that was the case, at least Hindus, Hindu nationalism, at least in that sense, will be at the probably our bottom of our concern, right? Because if that was the case, we'll be concerned about nations that are much more powerful, have a history of aggression and violence, right? And dominance in that sense. So that's ruled out. We're not really concerned about nationalism in that sense, right? Then the other keyword here is, are we concerned about Hindus, or like again, if we're gonna say Hindus, then I think what that means is it's sort of a religious slash ethnic reference, right? So are we in general concerned about religion and ethnicity? Now, again, that doesn't seem like it either. Like that argument also fails, because if that was the case, we would first be worried about the religions that are even more aggressive, more violent, and have had a history of such violence, right? Hindus, again, should be at the bottom of our concern. They've been mostly pacifist, right? If you take their history in terms of either, you know, if you think of either their religious leanings or even their ethnic leanings, right? Ethnically, they're that part of the world is very diverse already. So what's the concern, right? And that's, you got to answer that question, because that's what these propaganda artists do. They create these new words, and again, I've said this before. So for example, one thing I noticed was that, like, when I look at these publications, New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, and all the left-leaning publications in the Western world, none of them covered, uh, you know, uh, uh, Kamlesh Tiwari incidents, and a lot of them covered Samuel Paty incidents. And that tells me, like, why is there that bias, right? That's almost is sort of a kind of a subtle racism towards Hindus, right? But they've never invented a word for it, right? There's no word for it, what they're doing, right? It's the same colonial mindset, for whatever reason. It's mostly it comes from likely a religious leaning than anything else, and propaganda. Uh, they might or might not be aware about it, uh, but it exists, right? Now, the reason nobody pays attention to that, or nobody cares about it as much, is because there's no word for it, right? So you've created so many different words, and as you need them, again, that has been probably the single most, um, you know, a, a, a biggest brainwashing technique that the Western world has employed, um, to stay dominant throughout history. Because what they do is they come up with some concept or a word or a label, and they make you believe that uh, that concept is good for you, right? Uh, be it colonialism, be it industrialism. Again, I've said some of these things before. All these isms and labels, and now liberalism. They make you believe that liberalism is good. They make you believe that secularism is good. It's good for you. Nationalism is good for you. Or nationalism is bad for you. Globalization is good for you. Pacifism is good for you. Now, okay, that it is so naked and it's amazing that nobody sees it, right? Have you ever wondered why is there no pacifist coming out of the rest of the world? I mean, why is that the pacifism and the kind of, let's say, the leaders in pacifism come out of India, right? Be it Buddha, be it Gandhi, or all those concepts, they come out of India, right? For the most part, and they will tell you that, yeah, yeah, that's good for you, right? You should follow pacifism, but they on the other hand value their Maos and their Khilzis and their Timurs and their Alexanders and their battles and their wars and their generals and their commanders, right? They celebrate them. But when it comes to Hindus, for some reason, entire world, it is so crazy and naked. And it's amazing that a vast majority of Hindus don't even see it. Liberals mostly, or if they see it, they're so brainwashed that they ignore it. And I have a video on that as well. Like there is no tradition of valuing pacifism in rest of the world, right? Be it Christians, be it Western world, Americans, Europeans, be it Chinese, be it Japanese, be it Islamic world, like no matter where you go, there is no tradition of valuing uh, pacifism, right? They all value aggression, right? That's how their history has been. It's all aggressive, right? Uh, no matter how you think about it, be it like imperialism, be it industrialization, advancement in technologies, World War, you name it, like everything is about aggression, right? Being aggressive. Even the religious leanings are aggressive. They want to convert, right? And that is so bizarre that almost all the left liberal values, Hindus fit that bill and have fit that bill historically much better than the rest of the world, even now, even today, right? Eh, But that's largely ignored, or like no credit is given to that. So, okay, let's move on, right? So what's the concern? So what's left is that it comes back to the minorities that, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, Hindu nationalism, does not uh, pose any risk externally, right? I mean, if anything, other the rest of the world is actually a bigger risk, right? If anything, we should be thinking about, weapons of mass destruction, right? All the nuclear weapons and arsenal we've got. We need to think about, other nations that have had aggressive and violent history, right? History of war, history of aggression, and history of hegemony, right? So we should be worried about we, in terms of worrying about national hegemony and dominance. India probably is not that high on the list, right? You have many other groups of people and countries to worry about. Same goes for India in terms of religious hegemony, right? They're on the religious hegemony side, they're probably at the bottom, right? They don't even want to convert you. So then what it leaves you, the concern or sort of a false propaganda that has been created is that, oh, it's gonna be bad for minority. The rise of Hindu nationalism is bad for the minorities, right? And that's where there is probably a much bigger discussion needed here. Um, that what people don't realize is that Hindus are in a way a group of minorities, right? Ethnically, linguistically, even religiously, they're very diverse. There is no such religion as there is no such people as Hindus or a religion as Hinduism. It's all again, so again, it comes back to the labeling and packaging. Even those two words have been created by the Western world. Why? Because they did not understand that part of the world, and they had no time or no interest in understanding that part of the world. They just wanted to conquer that part of the world. And when you want to conquer a huge, diverse group of people, you just label them all together, right? So again, this is again so naked that everybody should see it, and nobody sees it, and it's almost nuts, right? The reason they attack Hinduism and package everything together, there's a very specific reason, right? So what they've done is once you try and understand what they mean by Hinduism. So, for example, does all the dance heritage and the cultural heritage of Hindus do they consider that to be part of the package of that Hinduism label? Yes. Does Sanskrit become a part of that package and label? Yes. Now, Sanskrit is a language, right? You don't attack a language. You don't attack uh, art forms, right? And so on and so forth. For example, vegetarianism, right? That becomes part of Hinduism. That gets attacked, right? So what they've done very cleverly is that, and this is part of the reason it's like, we think that the Western world has moved on. They're no longer imperialistic, and they're no longer racist, and they're no longer dominant. They no longer want to dominate. They no longer, have designs to dominate others who are ethnically different or religiously different. That again is only an illusion in some sense, because things don't die out that easily, right? It's a generational thing. It will take many, 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 many generations before they can come to a point where it's like, yeah, we have given up on our aggression. That they haven't yet, and it's not their fault. I mean, they think they have, but because so, for example, all the knowledge and all the information is coming from their previous generation. If previous generation had that colonial mindset to dominate, other races, other religions, that same, I mean, they're reading the same books, same information is getting passed down to them. It's not gonna die that easily, right? They don't even know the rich heritage and culture of Hindus, right? It's gonna, I mean, it's only now with technology and all this, age of internet that it's that information actually is traveling and getting disseminated. But even then, it's still very hard because they now get into this mode of propaganda and then that hatred that that they haven't really studied. That why do they hate Hindus? That if once you pose that question, like, okay, what's your reason for any hatred you might have for Hindus, right? And once you start analyzing that and putting that on paper, it will be very hard. Like, I've never seen any good arguments or analysis whenever this kind of, just an emotional appeal comes, right? There's nothing to back it up. And it's gonna take some time before those arguments and those books are written. It might take even like a century or two before they finally understand that, oh, okay, yeah, there was actually no good reason to hate Hindus. If anything, they're actually on the more liberal side than even the Western world is or ever has been, right? So let me go to the next slide. So the question then we raised earlier is that who is concerned? So let's divide. So somebody has. So when we say um, a rise of Hindu nationalism is concerning, then effectively somebody is getting concerned, right? Who is it, right? So mostly you see it in, again, I said left circles, left-leaning circles in the Western world and on the Indian side, and maybe in the Islamic world, right? So then what I did on this slide, I just tried to sort of divide the world in major groups and just see who are we talking about, right? Who should be concerned and who is concerned, right? So the first group I have there is like mostly Western world, developed, Western Europe, mostly white and Christian world, right? So now, because we're concerned about Hindu nationalism, which is sort of religious slash ethnic nationalism, then we need to sort of understand uh, the group that is concerned, what's their own character in terms of their nationality, their religion, and their ethnicity, right? What's their own character, right? It's important to, like, again, that's where the hypocrisy gets exposed. That if you're concerned about something, like if you're concerned about, let's say, lying, you don't like lying, then you should not be lying in the first place, right? Then you should be a truthful, honest person, right? If you're not, then your concern about being honest is really a fake, and actually, if anything, a dangerous concern. Like your motives should come into question, right? In that place. So, what's the religious character of, the Western world and the European world mostly? Uh, it's mostly Christian, right? And either Christian or this New Age atheistic uh, growth that is, recent, right? So what's the dominant or most prominent character of their religious leaning? Like again, they've had violent history and aggressive history, right? That's beside the point. We can say that they moved on, but the most important dominant factor is that they're exclusive, meaning that like the path, they say that this is the only path, and everybody else not on this path are on the wrong path, effectively, right? Even atheists will say that, right? That we're on the right side, you're on the wrong side. So there is sort of that very rigid mindset where I'm right, you're wrong kind of mindset, right? Very exclusive, very divisive, right? There is a rejection of pluralistic thought, meaning, there is no space for, allowing other thought processes, right? So now that's, we don't think about that. It's like we take it for granted that somehow the Christian world or the New Age atheist, they're they're the most pluralistic, most liberal leaning thought process. That's not true, right? At the root of their thought process, it's very exclusive, very rigid, no plurality at all, right? And they're not very diverse either, right? When it comes to, um, religious diversity or ethnic diversity or racial diversity. Okay, racial diversity, we can say again, that again is not, that's just a consequence of the brutal slavery uh, and their history. But generally speaking, there is not enough diversity, right? Or okay, in Europe you can say that at least you got linguistic um, diversity, but that's about it, right? They kind of don't really. I mean, they say they value diversity, but they haven't really managed. They've somehow managed to stay very less diverse, right? There is still a very um, concentrated group in that sense, right? Um, Now, I am sort of leaving out the Latin America side of things, which, again, generally speaking, in this context, probably does not have a huge influence, just to keep the thing simple. And what's the national character, right? Now, of the Western European and you sort of yeah. So the national character is like extremely destructive firepower, right? That's the national character of most of the Western and European world, right? Especially true for at least America, right? Was probably true for Europe, maybe not so much now. Very violent and colonial imperialistic history, right? Even like as recent as 100, 200 years back, right? Have conquered vast amounts of land and resources from native people, right? Indigenous people have almost destroyed the indigenous cultures and traditions, right? That's true through and through, everywhere they went and touched, right? Very strict control of borders and restrict freedom of movement. So now this again is so in your face, but nobody sees it, right? We all say, oh, freedom of speech, liberty, this, that, but nobody talks about freedom of movement. Have you ever seen a liberal talk about freedom of movement? Like, why can not an Indian move to America, settle there, and work there? Like, why is that not a liberal principle, right? Why do they guard their borders so strictly, right? It's not as if God gifted. It's like, oh, you're the chosen people. This part of the land and earth belongs to you. Like, it doesn't happen that way, right? Yeah, you got there first, you conquered it, but now you're maintaining your spoils of your war, right? You're guarding it, you're benefiting from it, and nobody questions or challenges it, right? And that's that's again such a big hypocrisy when you talk about all those liberal values. You talk about all the different freedoms, but you're not going to talk about freedom of movement. Keep that aside, right? We like our huge swaths of land, be it Russia, be it China. Again, I mean, China is not yet, like, China is not part of the Western world, but I'm just making that argument about having that land and resources, uh, be it America, Canada. No matter where you go, you have conquered large parts of land and other resources, and you maintain a very tight hold of over that, right? Now, why? Because again, it's the selfishness and greed, right? Again, that's where some of these labels are so dishonest, because they divert away your attention from simple fundamental truths, right? They can afford to say we value freedom of speech because now they have moved in a phase where they can afford to say that, but they cannot still say that we value freedom of movement because they haven't moved to a state where their own interest, like it's their own. The moment they say that, okay, from now on we're gonna value freedom of movement, anybody can go anywhere and we'll start it, right? You're free to come to our lands and settle there and work here. They can't say that because it conflicts with their own selfishness and greed and their self-interest. Anything that will be in conflict with their self-interest, you won't see that happening, right? And that's where some of these other ideas like freedom of speech, th- that no longer conflicts their self-interest with their self-interest, like because they figure it out, right? They've managed as a society to mature and come to a stage technologically and wealth-wise where it doesn't really it doesn't really will cost any group or especially any group with power and influence in any negative way. So they can afford it or they can control it, right? So back to this group, right? Western world, mostly white and Christian, strict control over their borders, restrict freedom of movement, maintained world hegemony, right? Again, I said this before. The only people on the planet have dropped nuclear bombs, right? Uh, and have destroyed the global climate and ecosystem due to excessive greed and consumption, right? Now, again, you can say, oh, but that's a consequence, that's a fallout, right? I was hearing somebody saying that like was with good intentions, it was technological advancement, industrial advancement, and the fallout was this. Yeah, but at the like again, that's true. But at the heart of all that is greed. At the heart of all that is aggression, a desire to dominate, not just other people, other groups of people, other nations, other cultures, and to steal from them, to steal their lands, but also nature, right? And that's fine. Maybe that's a human nature. I'm not. I'm just characterizing that. Like, what's the character of that group of people, right? So with that in mind, with that sort of I mean, very technologically very advanced, right? Culturally, I would say again doesn't have as rich or as ancient cultural heritage as some of the other parts of the world. Maybe Europe more than America, but at the end of the day, they have nothing to be concerned about, right? They have absolutely nothing to be concerned about with the rise of Hindu nationalism, right? If anything, they should encourage it, right? To maintain balance of power. That will be liberal principle. That yeah, we are technologically so advanced, we're militarily so strong. We want Hindus to be the same, right? What's the problem in that, right? We're so dominant. We control the world. We're so rich. Yeah, we want the same thing for everybody, including Hindus. Go for it. So when you see all so these kind of uh, propaganda in the Western world, it's so dishonest. It's so hypocritical. It's like if you want to start a campaign against religious ethnical nationalism, you should start at home, right? Okay, so that's the first group. The second group is like more on the sort of the communist bloc and the eastern part of the world, like let's say China, Japan, maybe include Russia and that part of the world, right? Now, their religious character is a little bit different, less aggressive, has probably learned and borrowed from Hindus and have those similar uh, pacifist style, Zen style philosophies, right? Um, Even atheistic leanings, but different kind of atheistic leanings, and not sort of aggressively atheistic. Uh, Generally less diverse, uh, or that can be argued in either way, but low acceptance for others, right? For example, Chinese case with Tibetans and you know similar uh, events and incidences. In terms of national character, now at least Japan has had similar imperialistic violent history, right? Maybe China to some degree, not as much, right? The uh, they're more closer to they have not been as dominant or as hegemonic as the Western world, right? Or maybe I'm sort of I probably am not as familiar or as well versed on that side, but the current environment is that like the probably environmental impact has been relatively low as well, right? And it's still low, right? But there are now at least maybe not the East in general, but now if you just look at the communist bloc and the China and Russia, they're at loggerheads with West, right? In terms of exerting control over world affairs and getting getting a piece of the cake that Western world has mostly enjoyed, right? In terms of having control of the world resources. So that's again points to the aggression, right? They're late to the party, but they're now catching up. And in some instances, one could say that for India as well, that yeah, they'll probably get on the bandwagon as well. And at the end of the day, there is a natural human tendency to dominate and be aggressive and to grow, right? But again, so that's that group, and then now currently they're very again technologically they're catching up, militarily they're catching up. That group. So again, I'm going back to the question: who is concerned about the rise of Hindu nationalism? Now this bloc, the communist bloc, especially Chinese, they are in direct competition. That they're direct adversary. So they have a reason to be concerned about rise of uh, um, India in general. Not just Hindu nationalism, but just in general, the rise of India is going to be concerning to them. So if you're part of that group, that's a different story altogether. But when it comes to like the rest of the East, like Japan, South Korea, etc., I don't think so. They have any concern as far as rise of Hindu nationalism because um, uh, there is a natural friendship and and sort of a fit when it comes to either the religious thought process or the values or the worldview in general that they have now no they share sort of the worldview of not being aggressive and dominating, right? So the first two groups again should not have any concern. The third group, which sort of you can almost think of like the Islamic world, right? Middle East and the rest of the Islamic world. What's their religious character? Like extremely aggressive, very divisive, very violent history, exclusive, very exclusive, no diversity, no human rights, almost backward looking, right? So first of all, that group gets disqualified immediately on account of, you know, saying we're concerned about the rise of Hindu nationalism, but they themselves have had a history of violence, aggression, dominance, and in general hegemony towards other groups, right? Uh, they don't adhere to any of the liberal values, right? That entire bloc. right? As their, you can look at their laws, you can look at their history, you can look at the, in general, what that part of the world thinks about liberal values and principles, right? So just by that, they get disqualified. They have sort of no um, moral right or logical right to be concerned about rise of Hindu nationalism. Like again, they it's an adversarial relationship in that sense, right? Uh, and there is a history behind it, right? They've they've inflicted so much damage uh, and you know uh, suffering on the the in that part of the world, the Hindu world, that if anything, they're on the wrong side, right? So okay, so that's their religious character. What's their national character? They don't have as much firepower. Maybe it's mostly purchased firepower or borrowed firepower, which in a way is a good thing because once you combine any kind of um, that kind of military firepower with that kind of backwardness, it's a disaster. It has the potential to be a disaster, right? So far, if anything, world should be concerned more about that in that sense. And so far, I think world has been lucky enough that that hasn't happened. But they have violent history, generally backward-looking societies with little acceptance of modern ideas. They have gotten rich, right, because of the oil. Some green shoots now that we're seeing in, some parts of that world where, there is finally some acceptance for and some flexibility towards modernity, but otherwise very violent, divisive societies, right, in general. Um, and you can see it through and through, uh, like wherever, whatever parts they've dominated, ultimately they've become very, you know, um, um, they've lost their diversity, culture, heritage, and they've just become those kind of backward societies. Whatever parts of the world um, this group of people have dominated, right? Now, here it's very important, right? Now, the Western world is now, and even the communist bloc, they find themselves up against parts of this Islamic world, right? So, for example, the French beheading, they're already discussing, oh, we got to close our borders again. It's the enemy within, it's terrorism, this and that, and war on terror. And, so they already see and accept and acknowledge it, right? There's a problem there. They're fighting that problem. They're trying to keep that problem out of their borders, right? But they understand it for themselves, right? That's why, again, I was bringing up the point that the Western media covered Samuel Patty, but they didn't cover Kamlesh Tiwari, but they do cover Tando. So, and again, that's the propaganda machinery, right? That's the hatred for Hindus, which there is no label, no world, there's no word. They don't even know why they hate Hindus. Like they they sort of will love the spirituality and the yoga and all that is coming, the music and the cuisine and the vegetarianism, all that coming from Hindus, but for somehow they're like, okay, we're just programmed to hate Hindus. We don't know why, right? We love everything about them, but we're still gonna hate them, right? They 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 have to stay docile. They have to stay powerless. They have to suffer at the hands of Islamic aggression. They have to suffer at the hands of Christian aggression. They have to suffer at the hands of communist aggression, and that's their destiny. It's almost like the Western world has decided that the Hindu part of the world is just expendable. Like, let them just vanish and disappear. Who cares, right? Um, we're gonna preserve ourselves. We're gonna preserve our borders. We're gonna preserve our big homes, big lands, massive control over land and resources. But we don't want to sort of allow, and we're going to even allow China to sort of, share in that piece of cake and in that hegemony. But somehow Hindus are just outside. They're like they are the pacifist. They should always stay pacifist, and they should just, almost disappear from the world. Like, we don't care. That's at least that's the kind of impression I get when I see in general what's going around. Or maybe it's just a propaganda that makes you feel that way, and that might be true in some sense, because when I was trying to when you generally see that social media and when you attract with everyday people, they might not have uh, that kind of hatred for Hindus. It's probably mostly ignorance, and if that some of that propaganda reaches them, it just sticks. It's just that false propaganda. So generally speaking, because again, the way people form their views is like, okay, if you have a beheading in the streets in the French, if your buildings are getting knocked out by airliners, those are the kinds of real incidents that will ultimately form your worldview in the longer term, right? Any propaganda piece in a newspaper that are becoming less and less relevant will have a very less effect and influence, right? And even if it has, it's going to be easily corrected, and that's what's been happening, and this is sort of my attempt in helping, um, dismantle those false propaganda. But then, okay, now let's just to complete the list here. What's the last group? Last group is the Hindus and other miscellaneous hippies around the world. And what's sort of okay, what's their religious character? So the first thing is it's pluralistic. It's many gods, many ways, many religions, right? One thing people again, the Western world, and again, if I want to use the word, I know some people don't like the that use of the word, but Abrahamic thought process cannot understand the Hindu way, the way Hindus look at religion. So Hindus don't even have a word for religion, right? You, on a Hindu world way, you can just call it, it's almost there is no division between religion, philosophy, science, and just spirituality in some sense, right? It's all jumbled up together, and rituals and culture and arts. It's all mixed in together. Like, there is no real division. That division only exists in the Western mind, right? Western or the Islamic mind, and that thought process. So from that perspective, for Hindus, there's no such thing as a religion. It's like it's almost like it's so personal to you that it's almost as if everybody has their own religion, right? It's that personal. It's your very private and personal worldview. Now, you will share rituals, you will share some celebrations, you'll share festivals, you'll share concept ideas but at the end of the day, it's as natural as it gets, right? With everything else, like for example, philosophy or arts, right? People share some ideas and thoughts, but then they can have their own personal experience with those art forms. It's the same way with religion in India, right? And that's why Hindus as a block of people, that again is a huge dishonesty towards Hindus. They're made up of minorities, right? That's exactly what it is. Uh, the only thing common that runs is just the an ancient civilization sharing, some common themes like living in harmony with nature, being having those ideas of pacifism. But then the diversity, the other kind of diversity is immense, right? Ethnical diversity, um, linguistic diversity, even religious diversity, um, cultural diversity. It's almost like a Europe there, right? It's almost like a Europe. Um, and that's what nobody realizes, right? So the religious character is very pluralistic, almost like a natural religion, right? So once you say that, it's like almost like saying there's no religion at all, right? They just have naturally human tendencies of making up those beliefs and rituals. That they evolve with time, and sometimes they can be as specific as to a family, right? Certain family will do certain things certain way. The other family might do different way. Within one family, you could have enough diversity. Um, and an emphasis on personal spiritual pursuit. The entire spiritual discourse comes from India, right? Which now the lines are getting blurry, more and more blurry between spiritual and material world, and like even the science and the scientific community almost talks about things like dark energy and all the sort of spooky action at a distance, and so many theories of multiverse and whatnot. It almost feels as if they're as as hooky pooky as some of these spiritual gurus, right? Those lines are getting blurred now, and that tells you that it's very natural. It's almost like a philosophical discourse than a religious discourse, right? So that's your religious character. Many gods, many paths, many religions, even, and even maybe no religion, right? It's like even though it's so important part of people's life, it's almost so personal and private that it doesn't create any conflict in any sense, right? There's no need to convert others. You just experience it all at a personal level, right? And then the national character now, that's another huge thing that goes almost hands in hand. It's like it has been a very pacifist national character. Like if you think about that entire subcontinent, there has not been an outside aggression, any designs to dominate outside world. There have been conflict internally, which again is very natural, right? That's how the entire planet has evolved, fighting with each other. But other than that, they've been on the receiving end of both colonial and religious aggression from the Western world and the Islamic world. Uh, that in the Indian people have suffered a lot, right? It's almost a forgotten genocide, right? And there is a lot more awareness now coming about that part of the story as well over many centuries. But still such a strong character that they survived and fought and preserved to have this continuous rich culture and heritage, right, from the ancient times. A very mature civilizational mindset, with ancient wisdom and history of pacifism, right? And not only you have in recent times leaders who have been pacifist, but from even the ancient times, that has been a central theme in many ways, right? uh, and living in harmony with nature, right? Uh, Compassion towards animals, right? Extremely diverse. We already said that. Which, by the way, now the rest of the world is catching on, right? Again, uh, that's that's the thing that's ignored and not given a whole lot of credit. That finally the world is seeing that you don't really have to be oppressive against animals. So again, that's I keep coming back to those labels and how those labels are um, uh, those labels and isms actually do more harm than good. For example, you sort of you should create so effectively the simplest most fundamental way to express many of these human values and labels is just to say don't harm others, right? If you don't have to, right? It's as simple as that. Like you can in four words, and that's the principle of ahimsa, right? Non-violence, although it's probably a much broader conversation. But don't harm others will cover all the different kind of isms and labels that the Western world has created. Now, the problem is the reason you create those are because uh, when you say a more fundamental, when you express something in a more fundamental way, it is very universal, right? Then you cannot escape, right? Once you say don't harm others, that includes everybody, right? Like that will include dogs and cows and people who don't look like you, and so on and so forth. Like it will include all all others, right? Other than you. But but then once you express something that fundamentally and that universally, it's much more difficult to follow it, right? So if you start there at that fundamental level, then you cannot say, "Oh, I'm gonna love dogs, but I'm gonna eat cows," right? You cannot say that because your fundamental principle will not apply to that. And that's the Western mindset. That's what they do. They come up with these labels and words so as to almost serve their self-interest. That's the whole reason. And that's where language is so important. That's where the ancient wisdom and language is so important that or even the thought process and just the process of argumentation is so important. And that's why sometimes, when I say having pages and pages and books of, if you cannot say an argument in a sentence or two, or at least if you cannot summarize it, then there is something horribly wrong there. You're basically trying to hide something. Effectively, there is a fundamental truth. You can express it more fundamentally and universally, but you don't want to, right? That's the whole. If you have to write like hundreds of books on a sort of a philosophical argument or concept, most likely the problem is you're trying to hide something more fundamental and universal, right? But again, okay, back to the conversation. So, uh, so who is concerned, right? There is no really, there is no genuine concern or a group of people that should be concerned about rise of Hindu nationalism. If anything, we need a rise of Hindu pacifism, right? Hindu plurality, Hindu wisdom, Hindu culture, Hindu tradition. It's already rising, right? As I said before, like you go to Los Angeles, there's probably more yoga studios here than in Delhi. It's already rising, right? The problem again is this propaganda where you've created this label Hindu and Hinduism. Hinduism is almost like saying Europeanism or Americanism. Uh, Other than that, it has no meaning, right? It's a word that was created by imperialistic colonial powers, right? Or those kind of minds, or invading forces. So we have to take that into account. A lot of the time, we forget that a lot of the worldview of towards Hindus and Hinduism was formed um, at a time when a lot of these liberal principles didn't exist. So it was set in stone almost from that lens, and it's never. We almost want to. We should any Western, almost like a Western um or outside India sort of documentation about Hindus and Hinduism that was, let's say, before or in the times when you go back 100, 200, 300 years, we should just throw all those away. Like that's almost guaranteed to be biased and wrong, right? Because of the people at the time, right? Uh, and the mind, like again, it's pretty simple thing to see, right? But anyways, I think I'm digressing here. So we can sort of okay move on to the next thing. Okay, with that said, um, if we've sort of coming to conclusion that there's nothing to be concerned about and it's all mostly propaganda. But let's say there is still, having said all that, let's say that there is still a concern. How do we solve it? Right? What's the solution? So let's say there is a rise of Hindu nationalism. I know it's getting really long, but anyways, I'll keep going. How do you solve it? Right? How do you mitigate that concern, right? So what exactly is the concern? And now again, I've made this argument before, but the concern really is that the minorities, again, that is such a dishonest view on that part of the world because again, almost everybody is a minority there. Like there is hundreds of languages and cultures and ethnicities, all of them are minorities, right? But let us say, for example, again, the propaganda tells us that there is only one minority, and that's the Islamic minority, although they that minority is once you just look at the rest of the Islamic world, you quickly come to you quickly come to see that okay, that they don't even ascribe to liberal values and in all the other liberal principles. So, but let's say, for example, for one moment, we say that, oh, these are Indian Muslims. They're different, right? Somehow they've become different, right? Again, a question should be raised there that why are they different, right? What is it about India that, you know, there you don't have even though you have millions of Muslims there, you don't have ISIS popping up there, or you don't have Osama's hiding there, right? That question should be raised as well. That's an important question, right? What makes them so different, right? But like even let's say okay, let's sort of agree that okay, that's the concern. The concern is all focused on the Islamic minority or the Muslim minority of India. Okay, agreed. What's the solution, right? So the solution, we've already done one solution. We carved out more land and created sort of brand new two Islamic countries. That again is for the world as a whole. that's not a very liberal secular thing to do, to create new Islamic countries, right? So you obviously don't want that, right? You don't want that to happen again. You can wish away Hindus, right? So then that's sort of the, again, not a very liberal way of solving that problem. You cannot just make them disappear, right? And you should not create more Islamic countries. That's not a liberal secular solution. The only other solution is sort of rehabilitate them somewhere else, right? So let's relocate all the current oppressed or potential oppressed minorities on less populated areas of Earth, right? It's a win-win for everybody. So, for example, America, Russia, China, parts of Europe, parts of Africa, parts of South America, they they can easily take a billion or more people, right, from the Indian subcontinent, right? I don't think so there will be a billion people oppressed in the Indian subcontinent, right? Or a billion people minority oppressed. And at the most, you'll say that, let's say, 300 million Muslims in the Indian subcontinent are oppressed and they need to be saved, right? Where do we put them? I mean, let's put them in America or Canada or Russia or Europe, right? There's so much land and so much resources. And not only that, the Western world will become so diverse. There will be such a rich diversity, religious diversity, linguistic diversity, racial diversity, and we want all that, right? We're the liberals, right? So we want all that, um, and it'll be win-win for everybody, right? Hindus are already diverse, so they're fine. Um, they and they will reduce the chances of any conflict, right? There's a abundance of land and other resources, and Western world can finally redeem their colonial past, and that will be a sort of leading the world and like taking a charge and showing the world how to solve big problems of the world, right? So I mean that sort of I've covered all my arguments, I think. I know it's um, a, a rather large video to listen to, but here's my challenge to anybody listening, no matter what group you belong to, right? You're the Western European developed white Christian part of the world. You're from the East of the communist bloc, Chinese, Japanese, Korean bloc, or the Islamic world, right? Or the Hindu liberal secular left-leaning bloc. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me what I said here. What part of it is wrong, right? Um, and what part of it is not liberal, secular, progressive? Like what part of either my solution or my general argumentation here conflicts with the liberal values, right? I'm so eager to engage and understand. Like it's the same conversation that almost 30 years back it was like, okay, what's wrong with the dog festival, right? The dog meat festival. And it was such, I've had those conversations so many times. I remember like 10, 15 years ago, talking to people. It's like, uh, beef is a food, but dog meat is not. And now finally, uh, 10, 15, 20 years later, uh, it's accepted. Like, or I mean, it's still not widely accepted, but at least the hypocrisy is accepted. You can see a lot of people saying that, yes, I am a hypocrite. Uh, I love dogs, but I eat beef. I am a hypocrite. There's nothing I can do about it. And that's good, right? That's genuine. That's honest. I think that's part of the human nature. We are going to be hypocrite. We can't really. I think it's parts of it is hardwired. We can't really overcome it. For example, sometimes another way to think about it, like, for example, think about lion, right? A lion or lioness might eat deer cubs, but they'll not eat their own, right? So in a way, there is a certain level of hypocrisy there, right? And it's hardwired, right? There's nothing they can do about it. I mean, and likely we have probably, uh, although we have hard times sometimes dealing with it, but we have that, right? We do have a way to deal with it, right? So in the same way, I mean, it's possible that one can be at least that's where I'm coming, trying to understand. Tell me, w- what sort of or at least my hope is that at least there will be some acknowledgement and understanding that, yes, we have been hypocrites and we do have these biases, especially towards Hindus. Maybe it's lack of information, or just plain ignorance, and what has been handed down, and propaganda. But at some point in time, I think we have to go beyond the shallow analysis that either Ratis and Akash Banerjees of the world presented to you. It's like, especially if you're a Hindu, if you're an Indian, um, you have to be able to understand all this propaganda so that you don't harm your own self-interest, right? That's very important. Um, and again, a lot of okay, I think it's getting too long. I'm gonna end it here. All right. Thank you, guys.